Welcome back to the Friday Show, presented this week by Icon Global. I'm Ray Pollock, joined by Joe Nevels. Our guest this week, Andrew Moore, the General Manager of Racing for the FanDuel Group, formerly known as TVG. Before we talk to Andrew, Joe, what's going on with Icon Global?
Well, Icon Global is putting out a call for offers for the Adena Springs property in Paris, Kentucky. Listen, if you're looking to start a stallion operation, this is turnkey. This has everything you need. I mean, we know that the legacy that Frank Stronach built on this property in terms of standing stallions, in terms of raising horses, all of that is available here. Put in your offers with Icon Global. The call for offers goes through May 15th, so check it out and get yourself a farm.
Yeah, one of the somebody I know that has a neighboring farm just described Adena Springs as just a beautiful piece of property, and of course we know that Frank Stronach spared no expense in putting it all together. So it's a great opportunity for someone. So Andrew, Kentucky became the 37th state, I believe, to approve sports betting, which is part of what FanDuel does. It's a biggest growth part of your business. 37 states since 2018. That's 5 years. It's come a long way. How do you compare the number of people that are betting on sports to the number of people that have had ADW accounts over the years? It's a lot bigger, I'm assuming, right?
It is, Ray, and thank you very much for having me. Yeah, so sports became deregulated for states to regulate themselves in 2018 with PASPA, as you alluded to. We are not in all 37 states because a lot of them are online only or monopolies depending on the state, but we are in 19 states online. We have around 50% market share of the business. To give an idea of scale of sports betting, in January alone across the states, there was around $10 billion wagered on sports. So, that's like 10x what you're seeing on horse racing. And this is something that's only 5 years old. So it's, in terms of growth, it's been huge. In terms of customer numbers, yes, much more customers betting on sports than racing. We're looking at, millions of customers betting on sports on a monthly basis, and it's just exponentially bigger. And I think the other thing to take into account is that it's a different type of customer to horse racing as well. It's a younger customer. They are very engaged with different content channels. It's the next generation of bettors, and this is it's without doubt going to have an impact on horse racing.
Joe?
So what are some of, you mentioned some of the demographics there. What are some of the things that you've learned about sports bettors so far in regards to their approach to horse racing? Do they approach it differently, do you think, than a typical, horse player you might see through an AEW or an OTB or something? Or is it pretty much the same mentality, just they're coming from a different place?
So we, in December, were able to integrate ADW wagering side by side with our sports betting products in a number of states on the same account and wallet. That has taken a while for us to do. It's not been simple to do from a tech or a licensing perspective. And what we learn about how customers interact there's probably a few different types of players. There are those who have always been inclined to bet on sports and horse racing, but have probably bet more on horse racing over time just because sports wasn't really available to them. They might have bet sports with a bookie or when they went to Vegas, but now their play is skewing more sort of racing, or sorry, more sports than racing, though they're still very interested in racing. So their seasonality is kind of changing a bit with their play. Then you've got those who've never tried racing before. For those customers, there's a few different types. There are those who come in around the big tentpole events, and we're expecting to bring a lot of new people to horse racing for the first time for the Kentucky Derby. I'm very excited about, just really introducing the sport. And then there is sort of when there's lulls in sport. So people are on the Sportsbook app. There's not much going on by way of sport. There is a gap in that calendar that day, or, it's a quiet part of the week. And they're engaging with racing and they're trying it out because it's interesting content to try. they're not so savvy as to know what a good race versus a bad race is. What interests them is that they can bet on something at bigger odds than your sort of typical -110 situation. They can watch the race live, which is pretty cool. There's very little live sport you can watch within the Sportsbook app. And also, while racing is not necessarily in their consciousness, there are lots of venues that they will recognize the names of, uh, Belmont, Aqueduct, Santa Anita, Gulfstream. They, may not be household, but they will resonate. People have heard those terms before. So it's not completely foreign to them either.
Mm-hmm. So what does
What about,
go ahead, Ray.
Yeah.
Oh,
I was just going to ask,
so
what about data? Because sports bettors are used to getting free data in a lot of different places. It's a little more restricted in horse racing, and you have to buy the data.
Yeah, there's probably, when you think of that onboarding and learning curve, before you get to data, you need to even know how to use it and know how to handicap. So sports customers haven't got to the point of, why are you charging for data yet? Why are you charging for data the way racing customers are? They're more like going, what the hell is this and how do I figure it out? And also the way we think about data from a traditional racing perspective, let's face it, it's like PDFs and sheets and stuff, which are very archaic for this new customer. So what we think a lot about is, how can we visualize free data to customers, expose tipping to them with some explainers. So really what we're trying to do is surface data and information to customers for free in an unintimidating type of way, as opposed to trying to get them to understand what a buyer figure is, which, look, we have, when we all got into racing for the first time, you pulled on threads and you got more and more into it as you pulled back the layers of the information available to you and as you understood things more and more. And frankly, we're still at that point where we're just trying to actually get them to be interested, sort of, and want to get access to more data. Longer term, racing absolutely is going to need to solve that problem of how it presents data. But I also feel like what it might have worked for the racing consumer for the last 20, 30 years, I feel like we may have to come up with something different for the next evolution of what racing is, because there's a few different issues. It's not just the cost, it's the accessibility of this data as well. If you think of, we go to the track and we meet handicappers, and one will be using, Thorograph, one will be using Rags, one will be using DRF, one will have their own specially formed program that they came up with, or some will be using Equine Edge. This stuff is all very powerful, but it's not very accessible in terms of separate logins, separate payment methods, cost money. So I do think that's probably, it's a fast following secondary problem of, how do you give powerful data to customers in the right way, which is, easy for them to access. And I think as much as cost is important, I think accessibility within their ecosystems that they live in is also just as important.
Definitely. So Kentucky recently approved sports gambling. From between this point today and when the first bets are allowed to be placed, what does the rollout look like in a new state when it comes to sort of the sports wagering side of things? And how does the racing side of that sort of factor in for, a state as racing heavy as Kentucky?
Yeah, well, Kentucky, is obviously probably the most horse racing dominated state in the country when we think of just, it's the home of the Derby, but also Keeneland kicks off this week, which is, iconic in its own right. And then we've got other tracks like Ellis, Turfway, Kentucky Downs. So it's definitely very different to any other state that's rolled out sports from that perspective. But the regulations will be done by the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission. So it's not, and to get a license in the state, you'll have to go through a racetrack. So sports betting in Kentucky will be very much be done under the eye of the racing industry, as opposed to the industry sort of on the outside looking in. So I think from a Kentucky perspective, those involved in horse racing can take comfort from that. From our perspective, we have around 50% market share in the states we're in. So we would hope to be a big player again in Kentucky. But again, if you're in Kentucky and you're kind of thinking, what does this mean for the horse racing industry? We've an awful lot of skin in the horse racing game. We own the TVG, FanDuel TV, which used to be the TVG network, which is, more watched per capita in Kentucky than any other state. So we'll be thinking a lot about how racing and sports work well together there. We are the only sports book that has racing available on the same account and wallet. We think about this stuff a lot. We think that racing and sports can play very well together long term. We're excited about Kentucky.
You'd mentioned earlier and just now the single wallet factor. It's obviously great to be able to have sports bettors just move over to horse racing without opening a separate account. Does that apply to fantasy sports too, that FanDuel is involved with?
Yes. Yeah. So if you have a fantasy account, you will have the same login password. Depending on your payment methods, funds will be able to be moved across. I'm not going to get into the regulation of that, but for the most part, is the exact same account. Yes.
So the Derby is our biggest handle generator all year. This will be the first year that you've got this single wallet approach. I don't want you to make any brash predictions, but I'm assuming your handle is going to go up on the Derby this year simply because of that.
Yeah, I hope you're right, Ray. As we think about this, though, the way we're thinking about it is, how can we introduce as many new people to horse racing as possible, leveraging the Derby? You can throw money at people, you can do all sorts of things, but nothing works better than top content. The Derby will have peak viewership of 19 or 20 million people. That's more than any NBA, MLB event throughout the year. It's one of the oldest sporting events, and there is it's a huge opportunity. We've got around 17 million customers in the US now, active on a month-to-month basis on sportsbook, runs into the millions. We're expecting our active numbers to be way higher than they typically are and have been on TVG. We have a partnership with Churchill Downs, which we announced last year, which we're very excited about. And that allows us to market this, the Derby to these sports fans, which probably have been, more at a distance from the Derby and the pound wallet, being able to push it within the sports book and being able to use Churchill's IP and having that partnership is very powerful as well. So I think there's a lot of things going for it, and we will be really leaning in, leveraging our social channels, TV advertisements, having a bunch of people from the FanDuel TV crew on site during the week. So lots we can do this year that we haven't been able to do in the past. And I'm very excited to bring new customers to horse racing and see then how they interact with it thereafter for the Triple Crown and then into the summer.
This is one of the greatest horse farms built in modern racing history.
The way this farm was developed makes it a premier facility to raise a horse.
It has 20 horse barns. It has 25 homes for employees.
You appreciate the fact that he took a blank canvas and developed it to one of the finest horse farms in all of America.
So the Derby is a tentpole event that doesn't necessarily need, other things to prop it up. Like, people will come to that. But if it's a typical Saturday afternoon race, or say a Wednesday or something, do you see it behooving tracks to schedule their races or their dates around other major sporting events, so maybe they get a slice of action that's already happening? Or I know you mentioned earlier that a lot of action came from times when there was sort of a lull in the major sports season. But, if I ran something on Super Bowl Sunday and people already have, betting on the mind, do you find that would be helpful, or do you think that would be a little oversaturation?
Well, there's probably two parts to this question, right? Is first off is just scheduling of racing in general.
Yeah.
So how effective is that, full stop? We tend to have a lot of good racing on top of each other. And then we have a very quiet period from, let's say Saturday to Friday. Lots of racing, but not necessarily a lot of quality. So I think in terms of, there's the general question, even without sports, of how effectively is racing scheduling, and how much have we tried from that perspective of just seeing what happens of eventizing racing during the week. You can tell from my accent that I'm from part of the world where we have major racing during the week, and the product does not suffer for it. Actually, it benefits because it is that major event, and it actually gets more airtime. It gets more, mind space in our customers as well. So that's, I think that's part one. With or without sports, that conversation I think is worth having. And then, yes, to your point of, should racing think about scheduling its product in and around major sports? Generally, yes, it should. But should it be thinking about running lower quality? And when I say lower quality, I mean relative to top class. I don't mean bad racing by any means, but in terms of what level is necessary, is it just a case of making sure that we've plenty of product on a Tuesday evening, or should we have stakes races on a Tuesday evening? Those questions are harder to answer, but I do think there's absolutely an opportunity. But we are early in the piece yet, and we need to figure out what that size of the prize looks like. But there's a lot of racing out there. And I think more effective scheduling and watching what happens over the next year is going to be very important to optimize racing's, opportunity in this space.
As you know, a lot of horse players grumble about things. And one of the things that's been on their mind recently has been the rebranding from TVG to FanDuel. And you have the odds and things on the bottom of the screen. Can you talk a little bit about the rebranding, the purpose of it, how it's going, what we can expect going forward?
Absolutely. First off, I appreciate people's grumblings. It shows how much they care. And we messed with something that people deeply care about. But we didn't do that lightheartedly. We are thinking about the next generation of gamblers, of sports fans, of horse racing fans. TVG is much loved, but if we were to keep TVG as is, or as was, should I say, the network, we would be looking at plateauing, and then what? So we do have to make some changes to think about. We want to be sustainable for the next 20 odd years. Like TVG is 23 years old. How do we stay around for the next 20? Now, you cannot make an omelet without breaking some eggs. And we did go into this going, okay, there are certain things we're going to do here that customers may not necessarily like, but we need to test and learn. We need to figure out what resonates, what doesn't resonate, fail fast in some things, lean in more to others. So there's a few different parts. We rebranded. Frankly, the rebrand is an absolute no-brainer. As much as the TVG brand is loved, FanDuel is investing over $1 billion in media marketing every year. And TVG is not a known brand outside of the horse racing space. Your non-horse racing friends do not know what it is. Whereas FanDuel, I can even say from moving here in 2018 to now, has become a way more recognizable brand. I will talk to people and they go, oh, you work for FanDuel. They understand what that is. You turn on a sports game, it's very likely you'll see some advertising. So when someone flicks through their networks and sees FanDuel TV, they know what that is versus TVG. So that's one aspect. There's other aspects that we've changed. We've got some shoulder sports programming on there. It's not on while North American racing is on. It's on before that. So we're trying to see, can we attract younger viewers in there, and where does that content play well? And we're learning a lot there. And we're actually thinking about more how we can actually make that play well with racing. And we might actually have some of that content live from racetracks in the not so distant future. I don't want to give specifics because I don't want to become a liar. But we are working to integrate that more with horse racing. So that's another aspect. But then there's also the other aspect of our investment in our horse racing production itself. If you turned on TVG, 2 years ago, and you looked at Gulfstream on a Wednesday, you might have had one person and a microphone at Gulfstream. If you turn on Gulfstream on a Wednesday during the winter this year, you might see Larry Colmus, Matt Bernier, Ashley Maylou, Andy Biancone, a drone cam, a jockey cam. So while there's a lot else that people sort of tangibly just don't like, because it's very jarring, some of the changes. I understand the bottom bar is not loved by a lot of people, but we're working with that. But then there are other aspects that we've really upped our investment in the horse racing side that mightn't actually people sort of feel or realize, but that actual production element around on site, we're sending more people to racetracks than ever. We're spending more on our production of horse racing than ever. So we are investing a lot, but I also understand the change is very hard. And like I said at the start of this point, people really love that network. It's really hard to make changes without upsetting some people, and we don't want to upset people. And I certainly don't want to be sitting here saying I'm not sympathetic. I'm more asking people to bear with us as we figure out what this looks like over time, and we figure out what is the best balance to entertain and attract and maintain customers for the next 20 years.
Well, Andrew Moore, your title General Manager Racing for FanDuel Group tells me that that's what you're interested in. And we're hoping that the integration of sports betting and horse race wagering is successful for our game. We really appreciate you taking the time this week to join us on the Friday show. And we want to thank Icon Global for their advertising support. We'll see you next week. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for having me, gents.
Support award-winning independent horse industry journalism and become a Pollock Report Insider on Patreon. For as little as $5 a month, insiders get access to exclusive Q&As with Pollock Report staff, insight behind our editorial process, exclusive opinions and on-site analysis, Pollock Report merch, and more. This is not a paywall. The website you know and love will always be the same. But if you want more, and you want to make our coverage even better, visit patreon.com/Pollock Report and become a Pollock Report Insider today.